Hi everybody, hope you had a good week. To start today, I just wanted to do a little review to refresh your memory. I'm going to go back to where the nation of Israel came from in the first place. So it started with Abraham. You remember him? He was very old by the time he had his promised son, which he named Isaac. And then there was his two sons. There was Jacob and Esau, but Esau did not choose to follow the Lord. And so God chose Jacob to be the next one in line for the nation of Israel. And he has a little pot, a little bowl of food there, because you'll remember that Esau, who was the older twin, sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of pottage. Then Jacob had 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And this guy is kind of colorful because he's Joseph. This little guy is Benjamin. Then out of those 12 tribes, you'll remember that Joseph was sold to Egypt. And so then all of his family came to Egypt with him because of the famine. And then the Israelites, their whole family, had so many children. They became a nation while they were in Egypt. Moses came out of that. And the nation of Israel and Egypt were feared, and so the Egyptians made them slaves. Moses was the one God chose to bring them out of Egypt and back to a place that would be their own land. And you'll notice he has the stone tablets with the commandments on it, and he had been a shepherd, so he has a shepherd's staff. When they got to the promised land, God set up judges to rule his people, the Israelites. One of the judges, the last one, was Samuel. You can see him in bed there because he was the little boy who was called in the night to relay a message from God to Eli. And that's kind of where we have to go back to for our story for today. You will remember that that message that God gave to Samuel was telling Samuel, and through him telling Eli, that Eli and his family would be punished because Eli had not disciplined his sons, and his adult sons were extremely wicked, and they were scaring the people coming to the temple. They were perpetrating evil against the people that came to the temple. They were causing the Israelites to sin. They were greedy, and they used bribes, and it was really awful. And so there was a battle, and the Philistines won this battle. And during the battle, Eli's sons were killed because they had taken the Ark of the Covenant. You remember the Ark of the Covenant? It was supposed to be in the temple in the Holy of Holies. It represented the presence of God in the nation of Israel. No one was supposed to have access to that except for the high priest. Once a year would go and sprinkle the mercy seat for the sins of the people. There was a lot of strict rules regarding this. It was not supposed to be taken to the battlefield. But because Eli's sons were evil, they took it to the battlefield like a good luck charm, hoping it would help the Israelites win. And God decidedly let the Philistines win to show this was not pleasing to him. The Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant. And you'll remember what happened when they took it. They took it to a temple of their god called Dagon, the fish god. And in the middle of the night, that fish god fell down bowing before the Ark of the Covenant. So they set it back up again, and the next night the fish god fell down bowing before the Ark of the Covenant, and its hands had fallen off. And then all the men in that area started to get deathly sick. Everywhere they took the Ark of the Covenant, the men in that area would get deathly sick. And so the Philistines had sent it back to Israel by taking a mother cow and hitching it to a new cart and then letting it go wherever it wanted to go. And even though it wanted to go back to its baby calf, God made it walk to Israel to take the Ark of the Covenant back to the Israelites. But it never made it back to the tabernacle. It was in someone's house. on their property. And the name of that man was a priest named Abinadab. And the Ark of the Covenant had stayed at his place for 20 years. Well, just going back to our timeline for a moment to refresh your memory. After Samuel, God told Samuel to anoint Saul, the king of Israel, even though that was not his first choice. The people really wanted a king, as you'll remember. And then after Saul, we talked all about that, came David, who was anointed when he was still a shepherd boy. And that's where we are in our lesson today. I think those words were backwards. Anyways, so you know that David was anointed the king by God because he loved God so much. And God knew he would obey him, not like Saul, who did whatever he wanted for his own gain. And because David loved God so much, when he became the king, he wanted to reestablish the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle. And David had made Jerusalem the new capital of Israel. And so he wanted to bring the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem where he was. He wanted it near him so he could easily go and worship. And all the people who lived near the capital could come easily and worship. So he made a plan. David made a plan to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Now in this plan, he did not follow the rules that God had set out. You remember way back with Moses, when God gave all the rules for the Israelites to follow to show they were a nation after God's own heart. Part of it was how to transport the Ark of the Covenant the way God wanted it transported. And David either forgot or didn't know about this. So when he planned to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, his plan included the priests and the Levites and crowds of people and soldiers, and he got a lovely cart. I'm sure it was very nice, and some oxen. And he was going to take the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem on this cart, kind of like the Philistines had delivered it back to Israel. There was just one problem. The Philistines didn't know anything about God's rules. The Israelites were supposed to know how to transport this. Anyway, everyone was very excited on the day that the Ark of the Covenant was coming to Jerusalem. They were singing, they were dancing, they were so happy and excited to finally have the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem where they could go and worship. But something terrible happened. Along the way, the oxen and the cart went into a hole, and it jostled the Ark of the Covenant. You'll see it's covered by blue cloth the way God had said. People weren't supposed to just randomly look on it because it was supposed to be in the Holy of Holies. It was supposed to be a very special article. Well, when the cart jostled, there was a man named Uzzah who was one of the priests, and he reached over to steady the ark. He didn't want it to fall off of the cart and get hurt, so he reached over to steady it, and boom, he fell down, and the people all stopped and came over. What happened to Uzzah? And he was dead. And fear came upon all those people. 1 minute they were dancing and celebrating and having so much fun, like the 1st of July in Canada or the 4th of July in the States. It was such an exciting, fun day, and then all of a sudden Uzzah was dead. And fear came upon everyone, and they stopped the cart and they took it into a nearby place, the home of Obed-Edom, and everybody left. They were so afraid they all went home. Now, we do need to have a reverence and a respect for God and the things of God. When we celebrate who God is and what He has done for us, that is a good thing. But we can't forget that He is holy and He requires reverence and respect. Always. The fear of the Lord must always be upon us, even when we are celebrating Him. Well, at first David didn't know what to do. He left the ark there. He went home. He was afraid. But then he started to hear news that good things were happening in the home of Obed-Edom, the man who had the Ark of the Covenant. God was blessing him. All kinds of good things were happening because he had the Ark of the Covenant with him. And David thought, I want to have the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem where I can go and worship God. And so he went to the priests and they looked in the scriptures and they read all about what God had said about the Ark of the Covenant, how to transport it, what to do with it, all the rules and laws. And David decided that he wanted to try again. But this time, he followed all the laws that God had laid out for them in the scriptures that he had given to them. Remember, the Levites were supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant on special wooden rods that went through holes on the side of the Ark of the Covenant, and it needed to be covered so people couldn't see the glory of it. And that was how they were supposed to transport it. And so that is what they did. Remember, the Levites were from the tribe of Levi. One of Jacob's sons was Levi, and God had chosen their family. Instead of having land in the promised land, their job was going to be to look after the tabernacle or the temple and the Ark of the Covenant and all the other things that God had set up to be used to worship him. So the Levites took the Ark of the Covenant. All the people came. I'm sure it was a little more subdued than it had been the last time because the fear of the Lord would now be upon the hearts of the people. But they still celebrated. There was music. There was dancing. David went in the parade. There he is. David went in the parade. He was dancing. He was so excited to be able to have the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. He was so excited. There was just one thing on that day. His wife, Michal, was watching when he came into the city. I don't think she was in the parade. She was at home looking out the window. And she saw David dancing wildly in front of the Ark of the Covenant because he was so excited. And she was disgusted. She was humiliated. Her husband, the king of all Israel, was being silly like a child. And she didn't think that he was comporting himself with the proper royal attitude through it all. And there was something else. After David had been hated by Saul and ran away, she actually helped him to escape and saved his life. But then Saul did not want his daughter to be married to his enemy, and he had remarried his daughter off to another man. When David became the king again, he requested Michal to come back to him, but she had already been married to another man. And so, and he was so sad at losing her that he followed her crying all the way back to David's. So her relationship with David was not the best anyways. And remember, he did happen to collect wives. He had a number at this time. So when she was all at David for the way he was acting, comporting himself during the parade, she criticized him when he came in and said, "Look at you, looking like a child in front of all the servants." And he said, "You have nothing to talk to me about. I was celebrating the Ark of the Covenant coming to Jerusalem. I was praising God and worshiping him. That is not your business." And after that, Michal never had any royal children. Well, as time went on, David built himself a beautiful big palace in Jerusalem. He was attacking other countries and he was winning. The Bible says God was with him everywhere he went. Everything he did, God was with him and helped him. And so he won many battles, took much land and property, built himself a big palace. But then he looked at the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant was, and you'll remember it was a tent that they had in the wilderness that they would roll up, pack up like a big tent, and carry off again when they went on to the next spot. I'm sure it was getting kind of old and ratty at this point, although the furniture was made of beautiful wood carvings covered in pure gold and things like that. So I'm sure that was still fine. But David thought, this is the God of all creation. He needs a palace like me. And so he called for a prophet to come named Nathan. And he told Nathan what was in his heart. He said, I would like to build a temple for God instead of the tabernacle. I feel like he should have a temple that's worthy of him. And at first Nathan said, that's a lovely idea. You should just go ahead and do whatever is in your heart. But that night when Nathan went home, God spoke to Nathan and he said, actually, I don't want David to build me a temple. I want you to go back and tell him that that is not my plan. And so the next day, Nathan went back to speak to King David and he said, God does not want you to build him a temple. He said, God has raised you up. He chose you. He made you king. He raised you up and he wants to make a house for you. Not a house like this. Not a house with doors and windows and floors. He wants to make a house for you. He wants to make a heritage. He wants your son to be the king and his son to be the king and his son to be the king, so that there will always be a descendant of David on the throne. Now, you may know that at this time, the nation of Israel does not have a throne. There is no king in Israel. So part of what he was saying was actual, and part of what Nathan was prophesying, of what God was saying, was actually symbolic. And he was referring to the fact that David's line of heritage, his son and son's son and son's 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 son and great-grandson, great-great-great-grandson, down through the years, would eventually result in the King of Heaven coming to earth as a child and being born, baby Jesus. And then someday the world would pass away and only heaven would remain, and Jesus would be crowned King of all living things forever and ever. His dominion will last forever and ever. And he was kind of a son of David, because when he was born as a child on the earth, he was born to the family of King David. And that is how God fulfilled his promise through the prophecy of Nathan. Well, David was overwhelmed by what God said and the promises that he made. And so he did not build a temple for God at that time. But God, through Nathan, told David that his son would be allowed to build a temple for God. And so David started to amass or collect things that he could use for building this beautiful temple, gold and silver. When he went to war and he got booty, when he got the stuff from the people that he won the war against, he would take it back and he would put it in his treasure house to be used for the future building of the temple for God, for his son to use to build the temple. And so that was how the plan started to be made for a temple for God and for the Ark of the Covenant to rest in and no longer be carried around. And it would be in Jerusalem, near the palace, where the king could go and worship easily and all the people could easily come in a central location and worship God. So that is the end of our lesson for today. I hope that all made sense and you're putting together the history of the world from creation to this point, and it's helping you to understand your life and the world around you. So have a good week. Thanks. Bye.